Hey friends, today is going to be a fun one. We're going to make a Svelte typing game. And you can go here in the post and you can load the example if you want. You might want to enable cookies in your browser since it's using StackBlitz, but yeah, give it a second, it's going to load in. But by the end of this post, you're going to make a speed typing game if you're familiar with something like monkey type. And as it loads in, I'm going to show you in. So the words are going to load in. You can say, and start playing. And we can skip words. And even in the monkey type, you should skip to the next line. And you can continue. But I'm really not interested in the game itself, but all the other things you're going to learn around it. And that's why I'm going to take more time in this one to explain my thought process and show you how to approach problem solving. And if you just want to make a quick game to add to your portfolio or whatever, feel free, you can just read the post and you're going to be done in no time. If you're watching the video, try thinking about the problem beforehand and challenge yourself, and that's really how you learn. And of course, this is a cooking show, so everything is prepared in advance, but if you're a beginner or feel overwhelmed, I already have an unfair advantage over you because I already spent the time solving this problem. But yeah, I'm excited to get started. To set up the project, I'm going to start a new sveltekit project with TypeScript, which is optional, and Sass for styling, which is also optional. And if you're afraid or don't know TypeScript, you can just ignore the types, so just remove it from your code because valid JavaScript is valid TypeScript. And as always, you can find the project files on GitHub, or you can open StackBlitz, and you can even develop this on StackBlitz if you go sveltekit.new. So let me just show you a quick tip. If you don't want to use an IDE, we can say sveltekit new, and this is going to scaffold a new project in StackBlitz, which is really awesome. I'm inside an empty project and I'm going to use pnpm, but if you're using npm, just follow the post. But for myself, I'm going to say pnpm create svelte. And then we're going to go for some options. So we can say blank, so it starts in a new project. Going to be an empty skeleton project. Of course, I want TypeScript. You can add ESLint if you want. For this one, I'm not going to use ESLint or prettier, so I can just say no to all of these options. Now we need to install the dependencies because it doesn't do it for you. And now it's going to take a second. But yeah, let's also install Sass, which you're going to need for styling. And that's how you set up Sass in SvelteKit. Simple as that. We're basically done. And also run the development server. So we can say run. And then it's going to be available at localhost 5173. And this is the default SvelteKit project. So let's continue setting up the project. Right here, we're going to create some global styles. So I'm going to close the terminal and leave it run it. And inside on the left, we're going to go to the source. And now I'm going to create a new file so we can create a new folder. I know it's counterintuitive, but we can create easily a folder. So we can say styles. And if you say dash, I can say app.scss. And this is going to create a folder with the app.scss file inside of it. And let me just close it. So I'm just going to import the Google fonts. You can get this from the post if you want. And let me just copy over this CSS reset. So we're going to reset the margin padding. And some people are allergic to this, but haters going to hate. I'm just joking. And then let's just define some CSS variables. So you can say primary is going to be tomato. And this is how I like to name a variable. So we can have foreground 100 and the other one is going to be 200. Instead of being specific with some variable names and etc. So let's do that. So I'm going to say foreground 100. I prefer using HSL, but you can use whatever you want. And we can say 98. And let me just copy over this line. So we can say foreground 200. It's going to be the same. This one is going to be 80. And then we can create background 100 HSL again, 20%. And 14, and that's all of it for our CSS variables. Now we're going to define the height so we don't have to use viewport units. So I'm going to say HTML body and app, which I'm going to add in a second. So I can say height 100%, and then for the body, we want to specify the font family to be Roboto Mono, which monkey type uses, and monospace. And then for the color, we can use var foreground 100, and for the background color, let me just scroll in. You can say background 100. And then let's add some default styles for the button and when it's hovered. So you can say button font in Caret. And this is a really cool trick. So you don't have to say font size, font family in Caret. You can just do it in one line of CSS. And then I'm also going to inherit and to say background none, border none, opacity, and let's give it a transition. So you can say all 3 seconds ease. This is default, you don't really have to say ease, but I like to be explicit. And then since we're using Sass, let me just, yeah, we're in a Sass file, so this is going to work. So we can reference this element. This is basically the same as saying button hover, if you're not familiar with Sass. But yeah, we can just say ampersand hover, want it to be cursor pointer, and opacity 1. And that's basically it for the global style. So we also need to make sure that in our app.html, so you can press Ctrl P, get the command palette in VS Code. You can start typing app.html, or you can use the sidebar, but this is quicker. And I'm just going to copy over this file, because basically we just need to add the ID here, but I also want to change the favicon, so really nothing special. And now, when we go to our project and refresh, we're going to see the favicon change, but now we need to include this. So if we go to routes, we can close app.html, close the SCSS file. And now inside routes, we can create a new file, and we're going to create a layout. If you're not familiar with the layout, this is what's going to be applied to every page in your Sveltekit app. So for example, if you have a repeating header, footer, etc., you can include it here and it's going to be shown on every page. So basically, this is where you're going to include the global styles. So I'm going to say script and then import, and this is a level above, so you can say app SCSS. Now let's change the title of the page. We can say Svelte head. This is going to complete. And let's see, title, Svelte type. And yeah, now we can just create a layout. I'm using Emmet, so I can say dot layout, and then I can complete it, or you can even press tab if you want. And the same way I'm going to add nav h1, and Emmet is built into VS Code if you didn't know, so you don't have to go out of your way to include it or whatever. But let me just copy over this. After the navigation, we're going to have the main section, and everything else that's on the page is going to be placed into this slot. So this is where our game is going to be, even though we're just going to use one page.svelte file. But yeah, so let's add some basic styles. I'm going to say style, and now you have to say that you're using Sass, or in this case SCSS, which with syntax it's closer to CSS, and I use it mostly for nesting, which is coming soon to CSS, so I don't have to use Sass anymore, which is great. Font family, and now we can say Lex and Deca, which is the title font used by MonkeyType also, and also found out that's on Google Fonts, which is nice. So you can say font size 1.8 rem for the color. We can say foreground 200, and for the letter spacing we want 2 pixels. And then let's specify a layout, so you can say height 100, and this is why we had to set up the height previously and include the app ID, because otherwise this wouldn't work. And now let's say display, not grid, but grid, very important, grid template rows. So I'm going to say auto whatever, that's going to be the header, right? And then I'm going to say 1FR, whatever is left, use it for a game. Then I'm going to say align items center, and let's just give it padding. You can also place this on the body if you want. And let me just go here, and I'm going to save it, and you're going to see things change. So this is basically it, and awesome. And now we can press Ctrl P, so we can start typing page, and this is the only page in the project. We can remove it, and awesome, now we have a blank canvas for our game. Let's think about the problem before we continue. I know you're excited to make this game, but I think a lot of tutorials make this mistake where they just tell you code and you really don't learn anything by the end of the day, right? Before we make the cardinal sin of just jumping straight into code without knowing what you're actually doing, let's first examine MonkeyType. How does it work, right? So we can start a game and we can see, this is really cool, right? And it seems like you're typing in values, but let's start to dissect the site, right? So if we go here, and let me just pull down this over, and let's see how this is even constructed, right? So, okay, so here is a word, and then you have some letters, right? That's already interesting. So it's making some guess, right? What the current letter is typed or whatever, and then it's going to put a class correct or incorrect. But how does the input work? And you can really find this out. Let me just restart it. If you go above, and here should be an input. So okay, so here is an input. Let me just open this. And okay, let's show the input, right? This is Scooby-Doo, right? We can just unveil the mask from the person. So we can say opacity. And here is the input, right? So this is how we pilot this game, right? Because this is some input which is hidden and we're typing in this input, but the game is checking what we typed and comparing it to the letters. And there's also, of course, all other things here that look intimidating, like all of these options, but this really isn't important. The most important part, what I would do first when I'm trying to figure something like this, I wouldn't even open VS Code. I would like go to the Svelte REPL or whatever CodePen, and I would create an input and some text, and I would be like, how can I drive the state of this through this input, right? And this is the first thing I would do to make a proof of concept, right? You need to break down problems like this step by step until you get to the final result. So if I go back to the post, I encourage you to inspect MonkeyType yourself and see what you can find out about how it works. Does it work how you thought it worked? Does it match your mental model? And despite me being horrendous at math, problem solving in coding is very much like math, where your goal is to know what information you have and try to come up with a solution. So for example, remember Pythagoras theorem or whatever, if you have A and B and then you can find out C and etc. It's the same in coding. So if I go to Excalibur, where I have an example here, here's how basically MonkeyType works, and we just really looked at this right now. So you have some hidden input, then it compares the first letter, and then it's going to say if it doesn't match, okay, it's going to be red, else it's going to increase the opacity because the letters by default have a lowered opacity. And that's how it works. And then we can also notice that it only has 3 lines, so later how are we going to solve this? So we just have 3 lines, right? This is really interesting. And if you pass a line here, it's going to update the lines, which is also another problem that's very interesting to solve. And then we also have the case of the caret. No, not the carrot, you silly rabbit, the caret or cursor symbol. So how does that work, right? Really, we're not typing text or anything. So this is just CSS, and it basically gets updated for every word, and then it changes position. So we also need to solve that problem. And once you start breaking down these things, you're going to quickly come to the solution, or slowly. And because you broke down the problems into all of these separate pieces, now when you need help, you won't sound ridiculous when you go and ask someone for help and then you're like, hey, can you help me solve this entire game? And that's like a lot of ask for someone. But if you ask for a small part you're trying to solve, like, how would I solve making a cursor like this? Then someone can be like, oh, I have an idea, you can do this and that, and you can be like, oh, okay, that's great. So again, let me just open the REPL CodePen or whatever. Let me try just recreating that part, and then you can go back to your game and start implementing it like that. But yeah, that's basically it. Having a rough idea of how the game works, always find it helpful for the next step to think about how to drive state using a data structure. So for example, if I go here in Excalibur, let's think about how we can represent this state, right? So how can we play this game? Or as I like to say, how can we drive the logic? So for example, let's say we have this sentence of words, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. How can we represent this? Well, the simplest thing we can do is just say split, and then we can turn the sentence into an array. And now since it's an array, we get all the indexes from 1 to 8. And now we can pilot this game. So we can say words at the index, and we can get the specific word fox if we say words and the index 3. So now we get that, and since we have a string, we can also use index to access certain letters, or you can even turn it into an array, which is redundant, so you don't have to do it. And now, for example, you want to say, okay, what's the current letter? And then you can say words, word index, we get the current word, and then we want the current letter, the letter index. And now if we have some variables in our application to drive this, we can always know the current word and the current letter. And now we can derive or do some other logic from that. Is this word done? Is this at the word start? Is this at the word end? And etc. And now we can say, hey, if this is correct, then we're going to update the class or whatever on that letter element. But yeah, once you start breaking things down, it's really not that scary. But instead of doing the mistake and jumping straight into code where you're like an artist looking at a blank canvas, just try thinking about it for a second. Try to diagram it, draw it out, use a pen and piece of paper, whatever. And you can talk to someone else, and when you see the data structure behind the problem, it's going to be a lot easier implementing the solution, whatever you do, be this a game or whatever application you're building. Let's tackle solving the words and letters logic. Before I do that, let's talk about game state. What most people do is they define some booleans, right? And you have, for example, game started, game over, and this is great. But this can get you into trouble because game started and game over can be true both at the same time, and you can run into impossible states. And if I learned anything about learning about state machines, using explicit state is really awesome, and you don't have to be a genius or know or use state machines to use it. So what do I mean by that? Instead of using booleans, you can just use a string or explicit state. So you can say let game waiting for input, and then you can use other explicit states. So you can be waiting for input, game in progress, or game over. This means that your game or app can just be in one state and it's impossible to get into an impossible state. This is what I'm going to do for this game. So let me just close it, CaliDraw, and let's get back to coding, right? So let me just open page.svelte, and here we can start. So let me just define script tag, and I'm going to define a type game. If you're not using TypeScript, just ignore it. You can say waiting for input, in progress, and game over. So you get great auto-completion. Then let's just define the type word, which is going to be a string. And now we can say let game, let's give it our type. And now we get great auto-completion. So if I already press here, I already know whatever I can type. And this is maybe more risky if you're just using JavaScript, because you really won't get auto-completion here. So you can type something invalid, but there's a solution for that too. You can just create an object like const states or whatever, and you can just place it in, and then instead of using a string, you can just say states dot whatever. And then let's keep the track of the element we're going to bind. So we can say typed letter. We're going to start with an empty one, and then just bring this back. You can say words, which is going to be word, an array. And let's just use a placeholder for now. Remember, start simple. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. And we can say split, so we can turn it into an array, so you can split it by a space. And that's really it. It's really nothing complicated. So remember how I told about piloting the game? Now we need those values so we can pilot it, right? And I'm going to say let word index. So by default, we're going to select the first word, the first letter, and we're going to keep track of the correct letters. So let's say let letter index. We can say 0, correct letters, 0 again. Now we need some reference to elements. And I've done this a couple of times before, but I found the easiest way is just get to reference to the element, and then we can use some HTML methods and etc. to get the current word or current letter. So we're going to need one for the words element itself. That's our container. Again, this is TypeScript, HTML div element. Then we want a reference to the element itself. So we're going to set this element. So we're always going to know what the current letter is, and we can use it. And then we need the input element, mostly because I'm going to use focus. So we need a reference to the element. So we can say HTML input element. And I'm going to define two empty functions that we're going to use in a second. So I'm going to say function update game state, which is going to be empty, and function handle key down. And this is basically where the entry point of our application happens. We're going to listen for a key, and then we're going to start the game. So this is of type keyboard event. And let's add the HTML. So here we can say game. And this is another tip. Instead of later having to do something like style, and then you can do some logic here to apply classes for whatever, etc., or using the Svelte methods like class or whatever, and you might not have some of this logic available. So what I prefer to do is use data attributes for styling. So you can say, for example, data game, and then we can set it to our state. And now in our CSS, we can say, hey, if this element data game attribute is currently, for example, game in progress, then apply the style for this element in this way. And that's really an awesome way to style your elements. Now let's create the input, which is going to be type text. And I'm also going to give it a class input. And let me just move this over like here. So we can bind this to the input element, which we just created. We want to bind the value itself to the type letter. So we're always going to take the currently typed letter and compare it if it matches the current letter. And we're going to clear it always after, so it's always just one letter. So the user is going to type, for example, A in the input, is going to compare it, then is going to do the logic, and then is going to erase it, right? And that's the game loop, basically. And then we're going to need on input. So this is going to do the validation. So we can say update game state. And we need on key down to listen for key events, so backspace, space, and etc. So you can say handle key down. Another thing you can do, instead of using on input, you can use a reactive declaration in Svelte. So you can say, for example, if the input changes, so it's typed letter, you can say update game state. And whenever the typed letter updates, this function is going to be run. But for some reason, I prefer to use on input in this case, but just so you know. And then just remove this, and then we're going to loop over these words. So remember in our example how the typing game worked. We can just go here, just create some space, move it up, and then we can create a div words, and we're going to bind it, bind this, so we get a reference to the element. Yeah, now let's loop over the words, so I can say each, and now we can get the words as word, right? So we're going to loop over each word as word. And then we're going to add a class, which is going to be a span, so we get it on the same line. It's going to be the class word. And now inside the word up, we're going to say each word as letter. And that's basically it. You really don't need anything fancy. And then let's create a span again. You can also say span letter, and this is going to give you a much better result, right? Span class letter, and then we're just going to output the letter, and that's it. Letter, and before I save it, let's just go here, and now our line should be output here. And again, starting just basic, right? Let me just zoom in if you have trouble seeing this. I think this is fine, right? So for example, if I now inspect this, we basically recreated the basic typing game. So if you see here, here is words, and then you have one word, and then these are the letters, T-H-E. And if I collapse this, you can see all of the letters are like this. And this is how you start step by step. Just do the minimum requirement. Even if you're struggling until this point, just do the first thing. Hey, how do I make the logic so the game started? How do I detect that the user is typing something in, right? And let's try this. So if we go here and then we can type here, and we're missing that logic. So as you can see, here is our state. So data game is waiting for input, and now we can style things based on that when it changes and etc. So this is really awesome. So let's also add the code for the handling of the keys. So we can say handle key down, and then we can say if event code, and this is more human readable to me, so we can say space, and then we want to event prevent default because I didn't save this yet, right? So because I can just use a space here, but we really don't want to let the user use space because we're going to use space later to go to the next word. So you can just say prevent default, and now let me just save it. So if I go here, I can type, but I can't press space because it prevents the default behavior. So that's really awesome. And now since you're using explicit state, this is really simple. So you can say if game equals, again, awesome auto-completion, waiting for input, we can start the game. And that's it. So now we just need to add the logic to start the game, right? And start game should update the game state, and I'm going to create a set game state also to set it just because it's nicer to use. And this is what being a developer is, creating free line from one line. Awesome. Get paid. So just above, I'm going to create a function, start game, and then we're going to set game state, which you're going to create. You're going to say in progress, and you can also just use a variable, but this is nicer to use in my opinion. So I can say function set game state. It's going to accept the game, which is going to be the game type, and we can just say game equals state, and that's it. So now if I even remove this set game state, I'm going to get awesome auto-completion. So you can say in progress. And now if I go here to the game, remember how we have our data attribute here. So now once we start typing something, it's going to change into in progress. Each time the player inputs a letter, it's going to run update game state that should set a reference to the letter element. So we need to know the current letter in the DOM, check if the type letter is correct, and then we're going to go to the next letter and clear the input because I only want to compare the current letter. So this is how it's going to look like. So in update game state, you're going to include some methods. So we're going to have set letter, which we're going to invoke, but we also need to create it. Then we're going to need check letter. Then you're going to need next letter, and then reset letter. Let me just comment this out, and let's go and set the letter. So here's the code for that. And the one thing we need to check if the current word is done by checking if the letter index is higher than the length of the word. And of course, this might seem like I know this in advance, and of course, because I've done it, but the point is that you wouldn't know this in advance, right? You would just make this, then play your game or whatever, test things out, then you'd be like, oh, this is happening. How do I solve it? And then you just go back and implement this logic, right? So it's really also important to stress out in this type of cooking show. Yeah, so let's just define the function. We can say function set letter, and then let's say is word completed. We're going to take the letter index. Is it higher than the current word, which we get by saying word index, and we get the letter. And here is one annoying thing, or I mean, it's not really annoying, but it annoys me. So for example, if you have an array, 1, 2, 3, and the way you would usually count an array, or when you're working with arrays in JavaScript, it's like 0, 1, 2, right? But if you get length here, it's going to return all the values, which makes more sense, right? This is more friendly. And because of that, since we're starting from the 0 index, we have to say -1 or -1. So you don't run into an issue and go out of bounds. But yeah, just a small pet peeve of mine. But yeah, let me just close this. And now, if we go to the next line, I can say if the word is not completed, then we can say the current letter element is going to be words element. Now we're reaching for the DOM itself. And it's really useful because it has a children method. And we can say word index, so we can get the current word. And then we can go deeper. We can say, hey, give me the next children. So those are the letters. You can say letter index. And that's it if you're using JavaScript. But for TypeScript, we have to cast it as HTML span element, so it knows what it returns. And that's really awesome. And let me also show you that. So for example, when we go here, let me just select this. I'm going to say current. And let me just console log. Go here. For the console, let's just start typing something and use dir. Let's get this in Chrome, it's dir. And then you can say the letter. So now if you go here, let me just search for children. You can see here are the children. And if you go here, here are the letters. So if you go even further here, you can see this is T. Yeah, and here it is. So basically, that's how you do it. And let me just clear it out. We can close it and we can clear this. And we can just continue. And let me just remove this. So again, this is the reason why I wanted to reference the words element previously. Using the children method, it's easy to either get the word element or the letter element. And I'm going to compare the typed letter to the current letter, and you can get the letter from the words array or words element using inner text on the letter element. And I'm going to show you how I do it here. And instead of setting a class like monkey type, again, I prefer using data attributes because it's really cool. You don't really have to worry about overriding classes, even though that wouldn't be hard because you have that API class list add, right? So it's not going to screw it over, but it's way nicer in my opinion. So the type letter equals to the current letter. I'm going to increase the score and set a data attribute data letter correct or incorrect on the span element for styling. And I also show you here how we can do it using a class. You can say class list add correct. And now let's uncomment this one and then let's just add it. So you can say function check letter. And let me just go here. We need to get the current letter. So we can get the current letter by saying word index, again, letter index. And we're not getting this from the DOM, but from our application, right? Because the words that we split previously. And I like to name things like this so it's really obvious what we're doing. So this makes a lot of sense when you're reading. So if the type letter, what the user has typed, if it's equal to the current letter, so if A equals A, for example, then we can say the letter element, which we have a reference to because we set it, we can say dataset letter. You can say that it's correct. And then we're going to say increase score, which we're going to add in a second. And then I also prefer to be explicit. Also another pet peeve, I really hate if else because it's really a mess to read. So I prefer to write it like this. It's super clear when you're reading code what it's doing. So if it's not current letter, just make it more readable. Then we can do the opposite. We can say letter element, dataset, letter, incorrect. And we're not going to do anything. And let me just close this. And then we can say function increase score. Again, we're getting paid for that 3-liner that could have been a 1-liner. 10x developers, easy game. Yeah, now we can say +1. Let me just comment this. And now we can see if this works. If we go here, let me just inspect this element. And now when we start typing, I'm going to type the lowercase I, so this should be incorrect. And it's incorrect, then I'm going to further type D, but it's not going to work because we need to go to the next letter in the post. So if I go here, we need to select the next letter and we're going to reset the input. So again, here is our game state. So next letter. And if I go here, let's see, increase score, we can just say function next letter. Again, that brilliant 3-liner. plus equals 1. And then we just want to remove the letter or clear the input. Reset letter, type letter, and this is going to clear the input. So let me save that. And now let's inspect this for good measure. Also, let me try to, so we get a clear view. Let me again type it incorrectly. So I'm going to lowercase t, incorrect. And now we should be on H, and this is correct, E, and awesome. We solved the first part. Now we need to solve how we can jump to the next word. But before we do that, let's just style the words element itself. The simplest solution I found to having a specific number of lines for words, if you remember in monkey type, you can have 3 lines at a time and then it scrolls up when you pass the middle one. And I found out the simplest way to do that is multiplying the line height with the number of lines you want. And you can do some fancy math and JavaScript, etc. You can create sentences based on the width of the element, and then you can say, hey, what is the current sentence? And then if the current sentence is above the middle one, then you can scroll up. But this approach is way simpler, trust me. So let's go here and let's add some styles. So we can go to the bottom and I can say style. Remember, you have to say that it's sass. So we can just say words, and then we can declare a CSS variable. So you can say 1em, so it scales properly, and then I'm going to say lines 3. And now we can give it styles. We can say width 100. So this is where CSS variables are awesome. We can say calc. So you can say var, the line height, and we need to multiply it by lines. And it's going to have the correct measurement because we're using ems. But if you don't have an em and want to have a specific unit, you can just multiply it by 1em, and then you're going to get that unit. But in this case, I just need some extra padding because I found that this works great, this number 1.42. And yeah, we can just go to the next line. So I'm going to say display flex. And I also want to wrap the word. So you can say wrap. I found out that 0.6 works great. We want it to be position relative because we're going to use the caret later. And it's going to place it to the left. And then for the font size, I want 1.5 rem. For the line height, we can again use the variable. And then we want to hide the overflow. So let me just keep this for now and go here. And if I save it, everything should work properly. Let me just zoom out. Remember, I zoomed in before. And now we can try this out. If you go to the top, just go here and copy the sentence a couple of times. So you can say one. Yeah, just go here. Let's save it. And because we don't have overflow, you can see it's like this. If I go here, line height, flow hidden. And as I told you, problem solving one by one, and this works no matter how much you scale the window and etc. And then we also don't want the user to be able to select the text, so something that can happen on accident. You can say user select none. And then let's style the letters. So here's where you're going to see the data attributes come into play, which is really awesome. So we have nesting. Then we can say the default for the letter. We want it to be opacity 0.4, transition all 0.3 seconds, ease. And now here's the interesting part. So we have to say, if I can type ampersand. Yeah, so we can do it like this. So we can say ampersand, and then we can say data letter. But since Svelte doesn't know about these classes, it's going to remove them from the final bundle because it purges CSS classes for you that are unused. So we have to say, hey, this is global or it exists, so Svelte is going to include this class. So we have to say global, and then we can say data letter. If it's correct, then we're going to just increase the opacity to 0.8. And then for the other one, we can also say global data letter. In case it's incorrect, you can say color var primary, which is going to be tomato. And then we can just say opacity. And then let's just save it. Everything is going to format because I'm using Prettier. And now when we go to the game, let me just type the T wrong. Oh, now it's an error. And you can see here it is, game is in progress. So you can also type H, correct. And now it's going to increase the opacity. And we can see this works great, which is awesome. And let's go to the post. And I mentioned here that allow the subtle but beautiful transition for the color and opacity, which you can tweak to your liking. And this is really the beauty of CSS and data attributes. Let's work on going to the next word. To do this, we need to increment the word index and reset the letter index. So for example, if the word index is 0, we can just say +1, so it goes to the next word, and then we say the first letter, so letter index is going to be 0. And this also counts towards the words per minute score, so we're going to score the player for pressing spacebar. And you can abuse this, I think, but later I also have assignments for you, and this is one of those things that you can try fixing yourself if you want. But in this case, the player could skip words on accident, so I want to make sure it doesn't happen on the first letter at least, and also take into consideration if it's a one-letter word, for example, I, because it's going to skip the word. And also remember, I have the unfair advantage of doing this before, so I know the issues I run into, and remember, this is a cooking show. And thanks to using explicit state, I can make sure this only happens when the game is in progress. So in our game logic, if I go here, let me just see next letter, reset letter, I guess I can put it here. Let me just put it in the middle here. So we can say function, next word, and then we can give it some conditions. Again, I prefer readability over everything. So you can say const is not first letter, so you can say letter index is not 0, and const is one letter word. We can say words, word index length, if that is equal to 1. And now we can use a conditional. If is not first letter or is one letter word, we can say word index plus equals 1. And then we can say letter index is going to be 1, and we're going to increase the score. Awesome. And now, as I said in the pose, you have to go to handle key down, which is here. Yeah, it's here. And when the user presses space, we want to do that, but only if the game is in progress, right? And thanks to using explicit state, this is really simple. So you can say game in progress, next word. And that's basically it. So let's give it a try. And also it helps if you type it correctly, because I forget a round boy here. And let's go here. So let's just see. So let me type E. And now we should go to quick. So nothing should happen if I type the letter, but if I press space, we're going to go to the next word. Quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, and again. And you can continue typing. So awesome, this wasn't that bad, right? We got here step by step. Let's talk about how we can update the line. As you type and pass the middle line, the old line should go up. The simplest way I found to do that is to take the Y position of the words container and check if the current word Y position is greater. To get the measurements, I'm using getBoundingClientRect, which gives you the size and position of an element relative to the viewport and is useful for many things. A picture is worth 1,000 words, so I want to explain it like this. So here is using the getBoundingClientRect. This is your browser viewport. So you can use getBoundingClientRect, and this is our words container, so you can get bottom, right, the X, and the Y. So we're going to get the Y from the top right for the container itself, and then for the word, if it passes a certain threshold, we can say, hey, scroll into view, and that's basically the simplest way I could find to do it. It works most of the time. But yeah, let's see how we can implement it. It's really nothing bad. And this is something really useful to have in your tool belt, and I absolutely love the getBoundingClientRect API. And it's even a great achievement for someone mathematically challenged as I am. So we're going to get a reference to the current word element and the Y position for the words as I mentioned before, and then we can compare it. So here where we have update game state, now we have update line, so we can place it here. Just place it here. We can say update line, and we can just set the function. So let's go before we reset the letter. Let's just go here. We can say function update line. So now we first need to get the word element from the DOM. So we can say const word element. So we have the reference here. We can say children, remember? And then we can say, hey, what word? We have the word index, right? And then we want the words Y, so the container. So you can say words element, remember not word element, but words element, the container itself. You can say getBoundingClientRect, and now we can get all of these properties from it. So you can say Y, and now we can say word Y, and now we're going to use this one that we got a reference here. So you can say word element, getBoundingClientRect, we're going to get the Y of that too. And then let me just, before I do this, let me just console log it out. So let me do it like this. We can say words y, word y. Let me just save it. And I can close this CollegeDraw. And now let's just open the console. And I'm going to focus the input. And let me just type gibberish so you can see the word y. So now we pass the first line, so you can see is the same. And now we're going to go to the next one. It's a bit different, but we're going to say, hey, next time check it. If we go to the third line, and then it's going to change. So now it's 252. And this is really a good way to move to the next line. I'm also going to show you another neat trick. So if I go here, let me just make space. I can say, remember, word y, if it's greater than words y. We can use a cool API. We can say for the current element that matches this criteria, we can use scroll into view, which is really awesome. So let me just do this. And let me save it. And again, I'm just going to type gibberish until we get to the line. And you can see it's starting to change. And I'm just going to do another thing because I wanted to scroll the center, which is really awesome because we don't really have to do any math because this would be a lot harder. So you can say block and then you can say center. So let's save this. And you can check out this API yourself if you want in the MDN. And now I can go here, let me just clear everything. And I'm going to, again, type gibberish. I just want to skip words. So I'm typing a word, skipping it. And let me just cd, so we can say quick brown fox. And now when we go to the next one, it should jump. Lazy dog. And let me just jump over a couple more words. And then when we go to the next one, it should also transition. So that's really the simplest way I could find out how to do it, and it works most of the time. It's time to add the caret, and I know what you're thinking, but it's not a carrot, you silly bunny. Caret is another word for cursor, but to be honest, they almost sound the same, or maybe it's caret. I'm going to add the caret element inside words and absolutely position it with a neat blinking cursor animation, which is really cool, and I'm going to show you how that works. And moving the caret is going to be simple as updating the top and left position of the element, so you can say style.left, etc. I already have the reference to the letter from letter element, and it has some useful properties such as offset top and offset left and offset width, among others you can use to move the caret. And let me show you how that looks like. So for example, here is going to be the offset top. So whenever we change the line, the offset top is going to change, and then we're going to transition the caret to the next line. And to transition it to the next letter, we can use offset left plus offset width. This is why it's really useful to look at MDN and read the documentation to learn about all of these properties. So for example, if I take this line here, let's say this is a caret, by default it's going to be absolutely positioned to the left. And then when we transition to the next word, we can say offset left, which is going to be right here, right? But we can also plus offset width, and then it's going to go whoop to the next word, and then whoop to the next word, whoop. And then when we type the last one, whoop. And then that's it, basically. It might sound complicated at first, but it's really not. And let's look at the implementation, right? So let me just close CollegeDraw. And then we can just go to our application. And for update game state, let's just find that. As the last one, we're going to say, hey, move caret. And we also need to do it for the next word. So if we go to the next word, when we increase the score, we also want to move the caret. And then we can include move caret, which is 2 lines of code basically. Yeah, so let's do it after we reset the letter, I guess. Yeah, so we can go here and say function move caret. So the first value is just an offset. I'm going to show you in a second why I've done this. So we can say caret element, and we have a reference to it, right? I think, right? Let's see, caret element. Oh, I guess not. So I guess we need to include it. I guess, did I do it here? Oh yeah, I did it right here at the top, yeah. So let me just go here, and here are our elements. So we can just include it. We can say let caret element is going to be a HTML div element. And then let's just go back, since we now have a reference to it. And we also need to add the element itself, right? So let me just say, let me go here, caret. We can say style top. And we can get that, let's use a string literal, get it by saying letter element offset top, right? And we need to include the pixel value. So let's just say caret element style left. Again, let's interpolate it. we can say letter element offset left plus letter element offset width. And that's basically going to be, don't forget the pixel value. Also, if you want, I guess you can destructure it. So you can just go here and say const, and you can say offset left, offset top, offset width from caret element. And then you can just go here and start removing these values. So I guess it's more readable if you want it that way. So let's save this. And remember, we have to add the elements. So we're going to jump to our words. Let me see words. And after the each, or before we end the div, we can just say caret. We can add it. And then let's just say bind this caret element. And we're also going to need some styles. And we're going to add it here. And now we have words. We have the previous styles, then we have a letter, and after the letter, here we can just include another one. So we can say caret. We're going to position it absolutely. We're going to give it almost the same height as the line height, but it's not the same, so we really can't use the same value. We can say border right 1 pixel primary, so we're going to give it a tomato. And we're going to use the animation caret 1 second infinite, so it just smoothly blinks. And then for all the other transitions, so this is our left top CSS properties, we can say 2 second ease. And then let's just define the keyframe. And you can define it at the end, but since we're using it in one place and it's specific to the caret, I'm going to include it here as nested. So this is really cool. So we can define a keyframe. We can say at 0, right? We can say opacity is going to be 0. And at 50% is going to be opacity 1. So instead of going from 0 to 100 being 0 and 1, so it would just blink rapidly. But we really want to go from opacity 0 to 1 at half point, and then we want to again go to 0. And then it's going to create a more pleasing effect. So to do that after 0, let me just save this and see if it works. Yeah, so it shows here, and you can see it looks weird. So we can just say, as I have it in the post, we can just say 2. So this is going to say, hey, after this, go again to 0, and it's going to just repeat because it's infinite. And let me save, and you should get a smooth caret animation. I did a silly mistake because, of course, here, where I was trying to be smart and use the structuring, here we'd have to reference the letter element instead of the caret element. So we can just say letter element, and now this should be correct. And if I save this and go back, I'm going to say the great brown fox jumps over the lazy dog and whatever. As you can see, let me just restart this. Pay attention to the cursor. So it starts bigger and then it shifts like, right? And this is because of the offset from the top. Just found this out by playing with the values. So I just have it in the post. I'm just going to define an offset. So I can say const offset. I'm going to say 4. And then offset top, I'm just going to say plus offset. And now when we start the game, let me just zoom in. So if I go here, you can just see it's smooth. Say brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. And that's basically it. So enjoy your blinking caret. To uphold a healthy keyboard environment, I'm going to make a game last 30 seconds, which is also reflected in the words per minute equation. So it really doesn't matter if it's 10, 20, or 30 seconds, the equation is going to take that into account. So you don't have to smash the keyboard for entire 60 seconds, which is awesome for me. Remember the start game function way back. I'll meet you there. So let's go to the start game function. So I can start typing start game, which is really awesome. And inside of here, you want to start the timer. So you can say set game timer. And then below it, we can just say, actually, let me just go here. Set game timer. And then to make things more readable, first I'm going to do it like this. Let's say interval. I'm going to use set interval. We're going to pass it a function which we're going to create, and we're going to invoke it every second. So we can go see function, game timer. And let's have some conditionals. Let's be really explicit. If seconds are higher than 0, so if it's not over, we can say seconds minus 1. which we also need to include here because, yeah, here it is. So we can go up and let me just see. Yeah, I'm going to include it here. We can say let seconds 30. And let's go back where we were. So defining the game timer. Now you can go here and let's be again explicit. So if the second is higher than 0, let me just make more space here so it's more readable. And then if game is equal to waiting for input, or the seconds are going to be 0, and this is in case we want to restart the game. So the timer hasn't reached 0, and you're going to learn this the hard way like I did, because when you restart the game, your timer is just going to go quicker and quicker because it's like stacking on top of each other and it gets crazy. So in that case, if the game is waiting for input, then you can say clear interval and we can clear the interval. And in case the game is actually really over, so if seconds is equal to 0, we need to update the states and we want to get the result. So you can say set game state game over, and we haven't created it yet, but let's just say get results. And then we can just comment it out. So we can just save this, and we also need some styles. So now we just need to add the timer itself and some styles. So if I go here, let me just see where we have our game. So we can search class equals game once it starts getting out of hand like this. So where we have our input, let me just close this. You can just add it here. So I named it time, not timer. And then here we can say seconds. So this should be visible by now. Awesome. But what we want to do, we want to hide it by default, and then we want to show it when the game starts. And in our styles, let's see, inside game, so we haven't even added it yet. I'm going to absolutely position the time element. So for the game, we're going to need position relative. And then for the time element, I want to position it absolutely. And then these are just numbers I found to work great. For the font size, I want 1.5 rem. For the color, I want to use that juicy tomato. So let's do that. Opacity is default going to be 0. And again, we're going to have a transition. I'm going to say all 0.3 second ease. And again, here is where data attributes are so awesome, because now, remember this isn't on time, but on the game itself. So you have to say, and now we don't have to use global because Svelte knows about the styles, because let me just scroll up. Data game, and Svelte resists, and it's like, okay, oh, this is all the possible values that it can be. So it's not going to give a warning and it's going to include the styles. So you can use ampersand. We can say data game in case it's in progress. And then what do we want to style? Time, right? So you can say time. Just bring it back to life. And now we can save this and everything should work. If I go here, you can see there is no timer here. And let me just focus the input. And now I can start typing and we can see the timer. And now if it runs out, we just have to trust it's going to be game over. When the game timer runs out, the game state is updated and get results is invoked. I'm going to define our words per minute and accuracy variables using a tween Svelte store to interpolate the numbers for a nice animation. I'm going to show you what it means in a second. To get the words per minute, I use an equation that considers 5 letters as a word because longer words should have a higher value, and then it gets divided by 0.5 minutes since the game timer is 30 seconds. So it doesn't really matter how long you type because it's going to take the game timer into account. And the accuracy equation is simple as taking the amount of correct letters and dividing by the total letters to get the percentage. And here in the code I even have a link to where I got the equation from if you want to look at that. So let's implement some code. So we can import the tween store from Svelte, import tween from Svelte motion, and now I'm going to add the values, words per minute and accuracy. So let me just find a cozy spot for that. This looks great. We can say words per minute, and again, there's nothing wrong if you just do it like this. Accuracy 0. But what I want to do is if you have 80 word per minute, I want to animate the 0 going from 0 to 80. Tween store is really awesome for this. And if you want to learn more about animation, you can watch my animation with Svelte video, where I cover everything I know about animations in Svelte. So we can say tween, we can say 0, and then I want a delay and a duration. And then again, we're going to say tween for accuracy, 0. And I want it to happen after the words per minute animation. So we can say delay 300 milliseconds higher, and then 1 second. And that's basically it, nothing complicated. And now let's implement the logic. So we can do it right here. So we can say function get words per minute. My biggest annoyance when I see code where it uses magic numbers that I have no idea what they mean, so I really love being explicit about these values. So we can say, hey, 5 letters is a word, and minutes is going to be 0.5, and then we just return math. And we want to round the number, and we can say correct letters divided by word, and I can put parentheses, but really you don't have to, and Prettier is going to change it anyhow. So I can do this by minutes, but if I press save, you see it's going to be gone. But yeah, so this is how we get words per minute, and it works great from my testing. So we can say function get results, and now we need get accuracy first, so maybe we should include it here. It really doesn't matter. We can say get accuracy. Again, we want total letters, and this is another function we're going to need. So let me just say get total letters. We're going to pass in the words, which is our variable here. Then we're going to need this in a second, and then let's just return again math floor. We're going to say correct letters divided by the total letters, and then we need to multiply it by 100 to get the percent. Just comment this out, save it, and it formats it correctly. So let's just say get total letters, and this is just using a simple reducer. So you can say function get total letters is going to accept the total words, which is, remember, the type word, but arrays. So we put the square boys here, and then we're just going to return words reduce. And basically the short version of what a reducer is going to iterate over each value. But basically a reducer is like map, filter, and those other higher order array methods combined. So we can just go over each word, and then we're going to increase the count by the word length. So basically here is the callback, and then we can just have our logic, whatever, and then we can say starting value is 0. So this is basically the previous value. So prev, and or we can call it, I guess, the accumulator, and then is the current value. But in our case, we can name it whatever you want. So I want this to be the count, and we're going to go over the word. And how we're going to get the count of all the letters? We're just going to increase the count by every word length. And this is going to give us the total letters. So the reducer is really awesome. And I rarely get to use it because it always feels like over engineering, but in this case, it's even the most simplest solution and the easiest to understand. So we can go back here, and here's where we can get the total words or the total letters, which I should update. And I also need to get the results. So remember where we define it. Let me see, get results. So now we just need to update the values. And if you're not familiar with Svelte that much, we have to use a store, and we do it by using the $sign per minute. So you can say get words per minute, and we can also get the accuracy. And this is going to get called, so don't forget about this one because our code isn't going to work. So let me just find it in the code. It should be where our timer is, right? So get results is called somewhere here. We even commented it before, right? I think I have to go up. Let me just see. No, it's definitely here. Let me find you. Where is the timer? Yeah, here it is. So when the timer reaches 0, we update the state, game over, and then we say, hey, get the results. And then we can save this. And then back here in the post, we have to use state to show what we want to the player. So again, explicit state is really also, now we can just say if game isn't game over, then we can show our words and etc. And then we can also add results if the game is over. And this is why explicit state is so awesome, because you don't have to juggle some booleans and get into impossible states. Yeah, so let's get to the markup, and let me just find it. So here it is, class game, right? And then you can just open the curly boys. You can say if game not equal to everything else that's game over. And let's just find where it ends. So it's right here. Then we need to close the if, and all is good. And now we can just add the result section. So if I go here and say if, and if the game is game over, then we can say results. I'm going to have a div that's going to have, let me say, p title, so words per minute, and then we're going to have p score, and we're going to use math truncate so we can round the number, else it's going to look funky. So you can say words per minute, and now let me just copy over this part. Let me go here. So this is going to be accuracy, and the score is going to be accuracy instead, right? And then we need to add some styles. So this is going to be completely new, so not in game, not in words. You can just go here. If you see here, this is like type to words, so we can just create new styles. We can say results, title, font size 2 rem, color var, foreground 200. We can say score, font size 4 rem, and I just yoink these styles from monkey type. Yoink my styles now. Primary. There's also play, top 1 rem. And also let me just save this, and I'm going to go to the top, and let me just set this to 10 seconds. So I can go here, and let's see. Quick brown fox jumps over the dog, the quick brown fox. Look at the awesome animation, and this is all thanks to the Tween store. And we also need to add the percent sign. Let me just check. Where is it? Accuracy, here it is. So don't forget to add the percent here. And if I do it again, oh, not here, let me go here. The lazy dog. And let me just wait for the timer to run out. And everything should look great. Wow, what a great score. Our game is looking great, but let's create our own words API, and this might sound complicated, but it's really straightforward using SvelteKit. Because SvelteKit blends the line between frontend and backend, so I guess you're a full stack developer now? Congrats! So I'm just going to take a JSON file of 1000 common English words I yoinked now and create a standalone endpoint in SvelteKit to get randomized words based on a limit. So you can go to this link and you can copy over this file, you can press raw, and Control-A, Control-C, and you can copy over the words. And now let's open the sidebar. So we're going to add the JSON file first. So inside routes, press new file. So I'm going to say API, and this isn't convention. You can name this banana or whatever you want. I just wanted to make it clear to myself and others that this is something I can consume inside my app or even expose it to the outside world, but you need to set up course and other things. So you can say API words, right? And then we can say English, and then inside English we can say English JSON. It's going to create an API folder, words, English, English JSON. Let's just copy over the words, and this is PG, so nothing racy here. So we can close this file and let's collapse this folder, and inside words we're going to create the endpoint. So we can say plus server TS actually. So this is going to create a standalone endpoint. You can return whatever you want from here. So if you're familiar with something like Express, this is basically the equivalent to that, where you can create your endpoint simply. So we can collapse the sidebar, and now I'm going to import the JSON helper. So you don't have to set the headers yourself for a JSON response. Say sveltekit. I'm going to import the type quest handler from types, and then let's import English from English, and then we can just specify our handler. So this is going to be a GET request. We're going to watch for the URL. Remember, we want to pass in a limit, so we can get it by using search params, and then we can just slice it using the limit and then randomize it. You can use a better randomizer than this, but this is quick and easy. So you can say export const get, to just use the type, request handler, like this. And again, also auto-completion. If I type here to the structure, the props, just say URL. And then let's define the limit. We can say limit, it's URL, search params, get, and the name of it is going to be limit from our URL, right? And then we need to turn it into a number, because it should be a number, so we can just cast it like this. And then let's get the words. So we can say English words, because that's the key. Slice from 0 to the limit, so 0, 100 is what we're going to use. And then we want to sort it, and the sort is simple as 0.5 negative math random, and that's basically it. And now we say return JSON words. And let me just save it. And now, for example, if we go here, let me just go to the API words. And now we can say if we don't pass it anything, it's going to return empty. But you can return a default if you want. And now if you say limit is 100, it should return 100 words. And it does, which is awesome. So now if I go back to the post, let's use this in our game. And I truly do love the simplicity of SvelteKit. It blurs the line between frontend and backend as you just wrote backend code and created an endpoint. So I guess you're a full stack developer now. Congrats. Let's use our new power and replace the placeholder text. You need to do it when the page loads though inside onMount if you want to fetch something. But I also mentioned here is that if you're unfamiliar, you could also pass the data directly to the page in SvelteKit from the server by creating a plus page TS endpoint for the page itself and receive it from export-led data. But this is what I chose to do here. So let me close this and I can start typing page. And this is the only page in our application. So here we just need to remove our placeholder and just give it a default of array as I have it here. So we're just going to reset that. We're going to need onMount from Svelte. So we can go here, import onMount from Svelte. And now we're just going to go to the bottom where you might have some helpers. You might move this to a separate file or whatever you want. But let me go here and right above this, we can say async function get words. Remember, we want to pass it a limit. And now for the response, we can await it. And since this is the endpoint inside the SvelteKit app, you don't really give it the full URL, you just give it the endpoint, API words, and let's turn this into a template literal API words. Remember, this is our API. And I just want to say for the limit to be whatever limit we passed in. And that's how simple that is. So we can set the words, we can say await response JSON. So when the page loads, we're going to get 100 words, and then this is going to set the words where we used the placeholder before. So now we just need to use it, and we do that by, I guess I can do it right here. So this is the first thing that's going to happen anyhow. We can say onMount async. I guess we don't really need to do that. Just remove this, because we're just doing it inside another function, and we just want to pass it the limit. You can say 200, 100, and let me just go and close this. And I'm going to save this, and let's just go here, and now it should work. So if we go here, awesome, it fetched all of our words. And you can give it more or less. For example, if you want 10 words, up to you, right? So this is really awesome how we made a simple API. I want to give the player a way to reset the game if they don't like the words or want to play again. I'm also going to include a toggle reset so you can use a key block in a second to play a transition when it happens. So I'm going to use the blur transition from Svelte, and we're going to blur the text when we restart the game or if we go to the end game screen to our results. So let's first start by importing blur. So we can go here and let's just say import blur from Svelte transition. And now here, after all of this, we can just say, or let me just go here, let toggle reset going to be false. And let's just define the function here for resetting the game state, because why not? So you can say reset game, and now we can say toggle reset. We're just going to flip it like a light switch. So yeah, and then you can say set game state, waiting for input. And remember, in our timer, we're also listening for this, so we're going to clear the timer if a reset happens. And then we again want to populate the words, so we can say 100 Now we need to reset the seconds to 30, the typed letter to nothing. Just do this. And the word index again 0. The letter index should be again 0. We also need to reset the correct letters. And we're going to reset our tween stores, so you can say words per minute 0, and we're going to say accuracy is 0. And of course you also might want to consider doing all of this on the server side, which you could easily do in Svelte, because anyone can mess with these values in the client. So maybe if you have some leaderboards and etc., this would be something that people could easily cheat in. But if you have these values on the server, then no one can mess with it. So maybe that's fun to do for you later if you want. So now we're going to find the markup where we have our game. It's already starting to get long, so we can go here. And where I have the words element, bind, we can create a keyed block. Let me just see, we have to type it, let me just say key. So you can say toggle reset. And then I can go here. Yeah, let me just see key. Oh, but it's right here. Let me just note this up. Now it should be happy. And now we're going to say when it transitions in, or the component gets mounted, it's going to be in blur. And then we're going to use a local property. We're going to say local, because we only want this to happen for this component, otherwise this will get blurred when our component above gets added or removed. So we can save this, and let me just see something. So this is our entire blur. So now let's add the reset button. So we're going to need it here. And I'm just going to say reset. And I got this SVG from Heroicons, but you can just copy it from the post. And let me just create a button first. We're not going to have any text inside, so I just want to use an area label. Reset, and on click, I want to reset the game. And here I'm just going to copy the SVG. But you don't even have to use an SVG if you don't want, and just use the text. So I can do it like here. Let me save it. And now when I go here, we can see it's here, and we need to add some styles. So that's what we're going to do after we also add the blur to the game over. So let's see results. I'm going to have in blur, and it's going to be simple as that. And here in the styles, let's see, we have game, and we have already time. So we can go here, we can say reset with 100, display grid, justify content center, margin top is going to be 2 rem. And that's basically going to be it. Let me see what it's complaining about. Oh, also I'm forgetful. Of course, it's complaining about a new selector, results and play when we have to add it, right? And I think I forgot about that. So yeah, when we need to go here, and after this div, we're just going to add a button. It's going to have a class play. Play again. On click, reset game. Let's save it, and let me just wait for the end screen. Just wait 3 seconds, and everything should work. Awesome, play again. So when we press that, we get this, and we can reset it again. And that's it. Alright friends, we're almost done. It's time for some finishing touches. I'm going to hide the input since you no longer need it, and I want to focus the input when the page loads. So to do that, let's go where we defined on mount, which is a long way down at this point. So we can go here, and I guess it would be appropriate to define it somewhere here. So we can say function focus input, making that 1 line of code into 3. Beautiful. So we can do this, and then after we get the words, we want to focus input. Yeah, so we can see if we go to our page, and I'm going to save it, and it should autofocus. Just see. Awesome, that works. And that's basically it. So we can also hide the input because we no longer need it. So if we go to our styles for the game, we can say dot input position absolute. We can say opacity 0. We're not going to see it, but it's going to be there, and that's how our game works. So let me just save it. And now if we're here in the browser, even if we just start page, now we should start playing the game. And let me just increase the timer to 30. And now we can just play the game if you want. And you can also press tab to focus if you lose focus. And then you can just type your heart out if you want. And let's just see if everything works. We go to the next line. And it really looks awesome, right? And of course, I'm at a disadvantage here. Let's go. And also now we get our score and everything works great. So if you press play again, and we can also reset it. And that's basically the game done. Hey, congratulations on making it so far. I encourage you to take what you learned and improve it because there's probably some bugs. I will be happy to see your improvements if you add me at joyofcodedev on Twitter. And here are some ideas. Right now the input focus can be easily broken if you press a random key when the page loads, so make sure you keep track of the focus and notify the user to click on the area for focus, just like monkey type does. For example, if this loads and if we press whatever randomly somewhere around, this game won't start because we lost the focus, and now you need to press tab. We only know it because we made the game, right? The user or the player doesn't even know that there's an input here, and then we can start playing. But make sure that this game can only start if it's a letter and that you don't randomly lose focus, so that would be really nice. And then let's look at another one. And then as I said, you can start a game on accident by pressing any key, but you could use regex to make sure the input is a letter, so that's really not hard in itself. Here is a more challenging one. See if you can add the logic to be able to go back to the previous letter. And you can do that by listening for the backspace key in the event listener. And then you just need to play around with the indexes going backwards, right? And see if you can figure out that logic. And let me just talk about some other ones. You can underline the skipped words the same way monkey type does it. So that's an interesting one. And here is the one that sounds like most fun to me because so far our code is very long. So we should make the code easier to manage by breaking it into components. Use Svelte component events to send events from child to parent. If you need it, I wrote a Svelte state management guide, or you can just read the tutorial to learn how that works. So for example, let's say that you have a game component, so you can have all your logic maybe in that file or in separate files. On the game component, you might have event listeners like on, start, on, stop, and etc. And this is really a great use case for component events. If you need more ideas, have a look at monkey type where you can get inspired, like implementing a replay feature. What? That really sounds interesting to me, so I really don't know how would I do it. You would just have to log what the letters user type right in some data structure, and then you could loop over it when the user requests the replay, and that's how I think you can make that work if you're interested. Hope you learned a lot, because I surely have, and despite not having a lot of experience making games, I learned it can teach you a lot about problem solving and coding concepts in general. So thank you for watching, and catch you in the next one.